On a quiet morning in a small American town, a family walked out their front door and were never seen again. No struggle, no note, no answers, just an empty house and a case that has haunted investigators for decades. Every year in America, thousands of murder cases go cold. No arrest, no conviction, no closure for the families left behind. Some of these cases involve ordinary people living ordinary lives. Others involve crimes so strange, so calculated that investigators still study them today, searching for answers that may never come. These are the murders that still haunt America. Stay with me. We begin in Springfield, Missouri. On the night of June 7th, 1992, three women, Cheryl Levitt, her daughter Susie Streeter, and Susie's friend Stacy McCall, vanished from Cheryl's home without a trace. Stacy had just graduated high school hours earlier. She and Susie had planned a night out to celebrate. They returned to the house sometime after midnight, and then, sometime between then and morning, all three women disappeared. When family members arrived the next day, they found the front porch light shattered. Cheryl's necklace was found broken on the living room floor. The women's purses, shoes, and even Stacy's car were left behind, untouched. Nothing had been stolen. There was no sign of forced entry. It was as if all three women had simply walked out of existence. The case became known as the Springfield Three, and it remains one of the most investigated missing persons cases in Missouri history. Over the decades, tips have poured in. A reward fund has grown to over $200,000. Several men have been named as persons of interest, including a local criminal with a documented history of violence against women who reportedly bragged to fellow inmates about knowing what happened to the three women. But no charges have ever been filed. No bodies have ever been found. Cheryl, Susie, and Stacy have never been seen again, and the person responsible has never faced justice. From Missouri, we traveled to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, for a case that took over 60 years to even identify the victim. On February 25, 1957, a college student walking through a wooded area outside Philadelphia discovered a cardboard box. Inside was the body of a young boy, no older than 6 years old. He had been beaten, malnourished, and wrapped in a blanket before being placed inside the box and abandoned. For decades, investigators had nothing to go on. No missing persons report matched his description. No fingerprints in any database identified him. He became known simply as the boy in the box, and later, America's unknown child. Detectives distributed flyers with his photograph across the entire country. They exhumed his body and reburied it with a proper headstone, paid for by police officers who never stopped thinking about him. Generations of detectives worked the case, passing it down like an inheritance, each one determined to give this child back his name. It wasn't until 2022, 65 years after his death, that advances in genetic genealogy finally identified him as Joseph Augustus Zarelli. Investigators finally knew who he was, but the question of who killed him and why remains unanswered. The person responsible for his death has never been identified and may have died decades ago, having never faced any consequences for what they did to a defenseless child. We move now to Rochester, New York, for a case so disturbing in its precision that it terrified an entire community for years. Between 1971 and 1973, three young girls were murdered in the Rochester area. Carmen Colon, age 10. Wanda Walkowicz, age 11. Michelle Menza, age 11. Each girl's first and last name began with the same letter. Each girl was found murdered in a town whose name also began with that same letter. Carmen Colon was found in Churchville. Wanda Walkowicz was found in Webster. Michelle Mayenza was found in Macedon. The pattern was too precise, too deliberate to be coincidence. It became known as the Alphabet Murders, and the killer became known as the Alphabet Killer. The murders sent waves of terror through Rochester families. Parents refused to let their children walk to school alone. Schools implemented buddy systems. And after Michelle Menza's murder in 1973, the killings simply stopped. No more girls matching the pattern were found. Investigators have never determined why. Did the killer die, move away, get arrested for an unrelated crime, and simply stop? Over the decades, several suspects have been investigated, including a man who worked near where two of the victims were last seen, and who reportedly failed multiple polygraph tests. He died in 2007, having never been charged. To this day, the Rochester Police Department continues to receive tips about the Alphabet Murders. The case remains formally open, but the person who killed 3 little girls in the early 1970s has never been brought to justice, and the families of Carmen, Wanda, and Michelle have waited over 50 years for answers that have never come. From Rochester, we travel south to Atlanta, Georgia, for one of the most controversial unsolved cases in American history. Between 1979 and 1981, at least 28 children, adolescents, and young adults were murdered in Atlanta, almost all of them black, almost all of them from working-class neighborhoods. The killings became known as the Atlanta child murders, and they terrorized the city for 2 years. Task forces were formed. The FBI became involved. Parents organized citizen patrols, walking their children to school in groups, refusing to let them out of sight. In 1981, a young black man named Wayne Williams was arrested and later convicted of murdering 2 adult victims. Based largely on fiber evidence linking him to those 2 cases, police closed the investigation into 22 of the other killings, officially attributing them to Williams as well, even though he was never charged with those murders and has always maintained his innocence. The decision to close so many cases based on evidence from just 2 convictions has been criticized by investigators, journalists, and even some of the victims' own family members for decades. In 2019, the city of Atlanta announced it would retest evidence from several of the murders using modern forensic technology unavailable in the 1980s. Some families have expressed hope that the truth might finally emerge. Others fear that the passage of over 4 decades has made certainty impossible. Wayne Williams remains in prison to this day, still proclaiming his innocence. Whether he is guilty of some, all, or none of the Atlanta child murders remains one of the most disputed questions in American criminal justice history. Finally, we come to a case that took place not in a major city, but in the quiet countryside of Indiana. On February 13, 2017, 2 teenage girls, Liberty German and Abigail Williams, went hiking on a trail near Delphi, Indiana. They never made it home. Their bodies were discovered the following day near the trail. In an act of extraordinary bravery, 13-year-old Liberty had used her phone to record video and audio of a man approaching them on the trail moments before she and Abigail were killed. The footage, along with a chilling audio clip of the suspect saying the words "down the hill," was eventually released to the public by investigators in the hope that someone would recognize his voice or appearance. For over 5 years, the case captivated true crime communities across the internet. Amateur investigators pored over the footage. Tips flooded in from across the country. Then, in October 2022, police finally announced an arrest. Richard Allen, a local man who had worked near the trail and had actually been interviewed by police in the initial days of the investigation in 2017, was charged with both murders. His trial began in 2024, ending in his conviction in November of that year. For the Delphi community, it was a rare outcome in the world of unsolved murders, an answer after years of uncertainty. But questions remain about how a suspect who was interviewed within days of the murders went unidentified for over 5 years, and what that says about the countless other cases that never received that same resolution. What connects the Springfield Three, the boy in the box, the Alphabet murders, the Atlanta child murders, and the case in Delphi, Indiana? They span 5 decades. They occurred in cities and small towns, in wealthy suburbs and working-class neighborhoods. But each case reveals something about the limits of justice in America. Cases go cold not because people stop caring, but because evidence degrades, witnesses forget or pass away, and the passage of time works relentlessly against the truth. And yet, as the Delphi case shows, cold does not always mean permanently unsolved. Advances in forensic technology, genetic genealogy, and simple persistence sometimes crack cases that seemed impossible to solve. For the families still waiting on the Springfield Three, on the Alphabet murders, on the true killer of Joseph Augustus Zarelli, that possibility, however small, is the only thing keeping hope alive. Subscribe to VaultX Mysteries, because the vault goes deeper than you think, and we are just getting started.